Hi, folks. My name is Bobby Allen, and I have the pleasure of talking to you in one of our segments on our Transform event. And my task is to talk to you about the future of cloud, and I'm going to talk to you about moving from what's now to what's next. And so before we get into that, I want to set the conversation up with a couple things that I think will help us level set. So we're going to talk about eventually top 10 predictions of where we think the world is going in terms of cloud and how things are evolving with our customers. But three things I want to kind of give you to kind of level set a little bit about my philosophy, and it'll maybe give you a little bit of insight about how I look at the market and maybe how we talk to people about these concepts. Number one, I'm a firm believer that everything new isn't good and everything old isn't bad. And so if we put ourselves in the shoes of our customers, we have to understand that they are wrestling with how to embrace which new things will transform their business and which old things to retain that they need to hang on to. I believe it's about mastering the remix, if you will, of the new and the old things that will help them move forward effectively. Number two, that's going to transform versus this is something to not pay attention to. And then third, I want to give you kind of my personal philosophy. The short version is that technology is the easy part of tech. The longer version of that is that tech is the easy part, people are the best part, behavior is the hard part, humility is the worst part. So let's embrace these conversations as if everything is not an engineering feat of strength and we're not one feature release away from saving the world. We want to use our technology to help empower people to do something different for their customers and solve a problem for somebody. Having said that, let's dive into our presentation. All right, so as we move from what's now to what's next, we want to do a few things. We're going to start with current trends, which we're going to talk about on this slide. We're going to go into some of the cloud pillars we have as people embrace our technology and use it to transform their environment. What does that look like? Number three, something that's very top of mind for people is looking at costs right now. So we want to give a cost framework that helps people understand where is the juice worth the squeeze? Where is the return worth the We'll go into a few customer examples of people that have worked with Google Cloud that have transformative results. We'll go into top predictions, and then we'll go into next steps before I get out of your way and make room for the next speaker. Okay. So on this particular slide, so a couple things are noteworthy. One, we see that cloud savings or cost savings is top of mind for a lot of people. And so we want to embrace that head on, like I said, in that framework. Three, the enterprise growth prediction that's out there in the second stat on the upper right section. We're going to have a lot of growth in containers. I think you know that Google Cloud has made a big bet in containers. We feel like that's a scalable, flexible framework to build on going forward. The stats and the analysts corroborate that. And so we should be bullish about making sure that our customers understand that that's our opinionated, flexible bet of how to support them in the future. Number three, bottom left-hand corner, obviously not surprising that a lot of companies are very focused on AI, ML, and ML in the future. The fourth stat, though, may be interesting, and that's the fact that a lot of the things that happen from a security standpoint are preventable. They go back to misconfigurations, and I will talk about that a little bit later in the deck. Now, as we continue, this slide is about giving you some practical examples for how Google Cloud can help you realize your transformation goals. And so this is how you build on our foundation to hopefully go farther and faster. So what does that look like? So one thing that we want to give you is industry leading best practices to help you build software better. And better means for us, at least lower cost and higher speed. This is leveraging a lot of the things that we do internally at Google Cloud to learn from how we've built software for years that empower billions of users. Number two, you can build on our global infrastructure that supports things like YouTube and Gmail and Google Maps, and know confidently that you're getting some of the infrastructure that supports some of the most popular properties on the internet. Number three, we build around premium managed services, meaning that you can outsource some of those typical things that you had to do to us. Things like monitoring traffic, things like managing Kubernetes, things like managing your databases. You can give that to us and trust that that's backed by our SREs and our best practices and our best attempts to make sure that you're comfortable with the level of risk to give that to us so you can focus on the rest of your business. Number four, going to the upper right-hand corner of the screen, security is baked into everything that we do. So this is not an afterthought or a bolt on. We want to make sure that you understand, you can see the rigor and the robustness of our security posture throughout every product and solution that we offer to you. This is something that we know is critical. Protecting your data and your intellectual property is something that is mission critical for us. We help you operate at scale across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. So this is all about preserving your choices and your options. So we want to give you open standards with opinionated implementations that let you run what you need to, where you need to run them, whether that's on the edge, in our cloud, in your data center, or in another cloud. There's a level of consistency you can depend on as we empower you to go where you need to serve your customers. And then finally, the last pillar is sustainability. This is an afterthought to a lot of other people. This is mission critical for Google as well. We want to make sure that we are not apologizing to our children and our grandchildren for what we did to the planet as we were doing cool things with technology. Next, you'll see that we have a whole integrated suite of products and offerings that fit together, that are purpose built to give you a full path to production that empowers builders, operators, security, data, analytics, really all the different people inside your business that are helping you gain momentum to serve your customers well. Next, we want to get into that cost framework piece we talked about. So the way to read this is, this matrix gives you kind of level of effort from top to bottom, low to high, and then level of savings, low to high, left to right. So what this means is things that are high effort and high savings are in the upper right-hand corner. Things that are low effort and high savings are in the bottom right-hand corner. What that means is you want to kind of stay away from the upper left, because those are things that have high effort and low savings. So that's the least in order of priority. That's the least effective type of solution you want to go for. So this is where we kind of bucket some of the different things you can do around cost, so you understand where those fit. I won't read through these. You can see these on the slide, but just understand that all of these different options have different levels of effectiveness depending on how you deploy those in your organization. All right, so let's actually start to talk about how, before we get into our predictions, let's just remind everyone of what our mission is. And so we want to make sure that we are accelerating every organization's ability to digitally transform their business, meaning taking advantage of technology to reimagine the experience for their customers, to save time, to do transformative and disruptive things. So use our technology as a foundation for business innovation in ways to really transform the way that they do everything. So here's some practical examples of some customers that have accelerated their transformation on top of our products and best practices. So I won't read through all of these one by one, but just know that there's a variety of industries, there are a variety of successful outcomes that folks have achieved: cost savings, time reduction, labor savings, data efficiency in multiple industries, right? So you've got your HSBCs and financial services that are deploying more and more software in a secure way. You've got your people like L'Oreal in beauty and retail that are leveraging ads to be more effective in how they're serving their customers. They've got governed data sets. They're leveraging our warehouse technology, BigQuery. So across the board, you have people that are achieving transformational outcomes. They're not just automating what they did before and taking old behavior to new locations. They're doing new things that are transforming their business. And so know that there are case studies that are more detailed that are behind all of these logos that you can share with your customers to show tangible ways that people are seeing a difference from using our products. All right, so now let's get to the part of the presentation that I'm excited about. Just to level set though, the future of cloud is not just about more products and more tech choices. It's also about evolving our thinking. So we need to make sure that we are not treating technology, like I said earlier, as if it's the only thing that counts. And in many cases, I would argue that technology has often not been the limiting factor in a lot of transformations today. Poor communication and unrealistic expectation setting have often been the culprits. Having said that, let me share with you some of what I think are the top 10 predictions about where cloud is going, with some customer evidence kind of sprinkled in of some people that are already moving in that direction. All right, so the first one. I believe firmly that people are going to focus on, organizations specifically will focus on value, not just cost. And the reason I say this is because we talked about cost in the beginning, because that's what's now, but I think value is what's next. Now, what's interesting about this is I think people focus on cost because that's what they can see right now, but that's not the only thing that matters. So here's how I would say this in other forms. The cost of something is a calculation. The value of something is a conversation. How much does it cost versus how much do I care? And so this particular customer, Banco ABC Brazil, achieved outcomes that were value-based, not just cost-based. They probably also saved money along the way. But what you see them is them achieving faster predictive models, scaling their data collection, being able to automate the way they process credit applications. They achieve value that wasn't just quantified down to a dollar amount. And I think this is going to be the language and the vocabulary that customers use a lot more going forward. What is the value that we're adding, not just the money that we're saving? If we go back to the genesis of cloud was about doing bigger, more innovative, more creative things. So it was about raising the ceiling, not just lowering the bottom line. I think we need to get back to that. Prediction number 2, I think organizations are going to rely a lot more on fully managed services, meaning they're going to outsource more of the things that are not differentiated value to us. And so that may look like deploying things like Cloud Run, like SAP did here. They needed the value of containers, but didn't need the overhead and the rigor of managing Kubernetes. So they outsourced that part to us. So they just needed the place to deploy containers. This improved their developer velocity. This allowed them to have small teams be very efficient and achieve a lot of things quickly, to leverage their small scale to get a lot done, to punch above their weight class is how some would say this. And so it's really important to encourage companies to let go of those things that are not secret sauce, that are not differentiated value, so they can focus on what mostly matters and what's going to be really different in the future. Prediction number 3, I believe strongly there will be less tolerance for unintended consequences. What I mean by that is, so on the earlier slide, when we started off with the agenda, in the bottom right-hand corner, you may remember, we said that 99% roughly of cloud breaches go back to things that were preventable configuration errors. And so one of the things I want to highlight here is a product we have called GK Autopilot. Autopilot, I consider to be Kubernetes with sensible defaults. And folks often look at Autopilot as a cost-saving measure. I believe it's a risk and toil-saving measure, more importantly, though. It closes a lot of those back doors and closes off a lot of those preventable issues. And so as we're innovating, what we don't want to do is to have a lot of our time go to things that could have been preventable, because innovation usually has unintended consequences. Let's try to limit those as much as possible so we're not paying the piper, so to speak, or feeling the consequences of moving too quickly. All right, next prediction. It is very important to make sure that we are empowering builders, but not sacrificing operators. And so we have companies like Unix that are building robust platforms, leveraging some of the same infrastructure that powers things like YouTube, leveraging our best practices. But we need to make sure we're related to the complexities of building, but also supporting and maintaining things. Now, many of us that have been in tech for a while have had systems that were running in development and got thrown over the wall to production. This is only going to be around for a little bit. And then 3 years later, when it had chewing gum and duct tape on it, it's still operating. We can't do that anymore. So we need to make sure we're supporting everyone. And so what this customer achieved was efficiency, because we offer tools and out-of-the-box best practices around monitoring and observability and logging that they took advantage of to make sure that their operators were empowered, not just the builders. I think this is going to be pretty important for everyone going forward. The next thing that's interesting, obviously AI and ML are very buzzwordy right now, but we've got to put it in proper context. We still need to make sure that we're focused on customers and grounded in best practices. So a couple things. So you can look at AI and ML for Google kind of in front of the curtain and behind the curtain. So there are things you can take advantage of that touch customers directly, right? If you're a business, the ability to leverage pre-trained models and deploy things, to look at data sets that we put out there publicly, things like Vertex AI and so forth. But there's also AI and ML that's running behind the curtain to empower the way that you serve your customers. So what does it look like if I have unintended projects or workloads that need to be right sized? I've got VMs that are too big or the inappropriate amount of storage. What about security misconfiguration? So we're running these things behind the scenes to make sure that you're supporting your customers as efficiently as possible and protecting you from risks and unintended consequences, as we talked about previously. Next one. I think it's going to be really important to make sure that we see people heading towards optimizing time, not just optimizing costs. So real quick story. So one of the things that I did when I got into tech and I started traveling a lot, I did 10 years of startups, is I stopped cutting my own grass because I was traveling all during the week. And my wife and I had an honest conversation that it was better for my wallet for me to cut my grass after being gone all week, but it was better for my relationships to let someone else do it. Saving time was more important than saving money. And this is where I think a lot of enterprises are going to go. How can I save time so that I can focus more on relationships with my customers? more relationships with my stakeholders. Saving money does matter, but there are things that matter a lot less or more in the long term. Getting lines in my grass straight wasn't as important as spending time with my kids who were growing up. And I think a lot of our customers are in that same boat. Operating things in a data center, operating a particular service that I can outsource to Google are not as important. They want transformative outcomes that will let them be disruptive, get to market faster, and bring value to their customers faster than ever. That's what really matters. And to speed up a little bit here for the sake of time. Number 7, I think companies are going to embrace cross-functional solutions. I call this Cloud Plus. People would argue that you can build cool solutions everywhere. To a degree, that is true. We know that Google Cloud has some differentiating features, but companies like Uber and Carrefour, when you look at their case studies, will argue that they didn't just choose Google just because of our tech. They like the fact that we can actually not just help them build something cool, but get that in front of the right people who can appreciate these transformative experiences. Our other reach with things like search and ads and maps and YouTube, for example, let them target those customers who can come to these new experiences. So this is going to be critical to kind of connect the power across all of Alphabet. I think this is going to be a lot of where the future goes. If we're all building cool stuff, how do we get in front of the new people who can take advantage of it? All right, number 8. Typically, these would have been 3 disparate things before. And I think companies are going to expect, if not demand, immediate stability, near-term innovation, and future flexibility all at the same time. And again, there are case studies that underpin how all 3 of these firms achieve these seemingly varying objectives, but how these are all things that Google Cloud can help you do. All right, number 9, shifting to transformation versus just evolution. So let me just say this. Sometimes for cloud, we take old behavior to a new location. And the reality is we have to ask ourselves, are we transforming or just automating the mess? So here's what I would say. If you do the wrong thing in the right location, that's still wrong. So the example I often give is eating fried chicken at the beach doesn't give you a beach body. I need to do the right thing in the right location. And one of the things that Lowe's embraced is that they needed to transform, not just move old behaviors to a new place. And so they really embraced changing the experience for their customers. It wasn't just taking the things that they did in the data center to the cloud. They really wanted to change their behavior, which ultimately let them impact the customer experience for their end users. And then the last one, I think it's going to be really interesting. We used to say, and we often say sometimes, that everyone is a tech company. I think that's going to move from everyone is a tech company to everyone is a cloud and a data company. Watch this. The reward for success in today's economy is usually more data. The more that people like your solution, the more they're going to keep doing things with you and give you more information. And the challenge is going to be, how do we get more efficient with getting value from that to make sure we're serving our people well? So finally, I want to give you kind of a couple different ways you can take this to the next level. So we have self-service options, kind of self-guided things that you can do, free tooling, free classes, first-party tools. You can stay on top of our blogs and look at our sessions from prior conferences and things of that nature. But there's also a guided option, which is the one that I recommend, where Google will come alongside you to deliver workshops in person. You can have your senior leaders join one of our executive cohorts to learn from other folks. And we can put together things like sustainable learning plans in terms of what does it look like for you to have training and execution that go hand in hand, because I believe training doesn't age well. If people take things in and don't get a chance to work it out, it's not going to stick. So let us come alongside and help you. We want to do our best to partner with you, not just throw tools over the wall. I've said this in other forums. A product is good, a plan is better, a partner is best. Let Google Cloud be your partner at multiple levels of your organization to help you understand how you can learn from our mistakes and best practices and use Google Cloud technology to transform your business. That concludes my section. I want to hand it off to the next speaker. Please stay with us through the balance of this event. And we are looking forward to you hopefully being empowered with this content to help your customers on their journey. Thank you.
So my name is Cedric Yao. I am one of the heads of app innovation programs here at Google Cloud. And what we're going to discuss here is winning with some cloud architectures and approaches that have worked well for me. One of the things I love to start with here is something interesting here about this photo. This is a picture from a train station in the early 2000s. The thing you notice is how people are conversing, looking up, folks are waiting around, life looks slower pace. And that's because nobody's got cell phones here, right? Let's fast forward a decade. And this is what life still looks like today. It's always on, always connected, real-time access to information we need, always. The mobile phone brought a computer to your pocket and the world's data to your fingertips. Well, let's fast forward another decade to 2020. And we all know what happened when we shut down the world. There's a sudden shift to work from home. In fact, many of us got an email on Thursday or Friday saying, hey, go work from home. And in a blink of an eye, the world changed again. We had customers like Home Depot delivering curbside pickups in 2 weeks. Governments had to build COVID apps in weeks, not years. And one would have thought shutting down the world would have slowed things down, but no one anticipated that it actually sped things up. See, the world is moving faster. Security threats are more pervasive than ever. The ability to achieve planet-wide scale reliably is more important than ever. And the reason is because we're all becoming software companies. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to illustrate some approaches and architectures that have served me well in helping other organizations such as yourselves getting better at delivering software. So let's dive into some modern approaches here. The first one is developing an evolutionary mindset. Many of folks have heard of our Moonshot Factory, where we try to answer questions like, what if you could read a plant like you could read a book? Or what if we could protect the ocean while feeding the world sustainably? See, the thing about moonshots are we don't get there in one shot. People often have the saying, if you shoot for the stars, eventually you'll land on the moon. Well, the reality is not even NASA made it to the moon in one shot, right? We had Mercury, Gemini, finally Apollo program. You get there taking what I like to call roof shots. These roof shots will continually deliver value, continually improve, continually fail, and continually learn, all while evolving at the same time. The next approach I've seen great success with is adopting product teams over project teams. Project teams are optimized around efficiency and repeatability. They often lean on manufacturing practices where there's a well understood definition of done, and the ability to move on from one batch of work to the next is critical. See, at the top, there's a buyer who happens to own a budget, and the requirements are defined by what that budget owner wants. The engineering team, they get one shot to deliver a version on time, on scope, on budget. And then they hand their work over to an operations team whose primary objective is to keep this thing stable. The user's sole avenue for feedback is to file a support ticket. And that's the challenge with this model. See, if you're successful, the vast majority of a product's life is spent post-release. And so when handing a product over to another organization to operate, that's typically one of the largest steps towards a system becoming legacy. Product teams are different in that instead of focusing on a before and after, they focus on continual improvement. There's no buyer. Rather, it's the user who is at the heart of the product. At Google, that's represented by our core values: respect the user. Instead of fixed deadlines and milestones, there are only backlogs of user stories with incrementally rich features. A product team does not abandon its work after version 1.0 and remains dedicated to that solution, continually improving its functionality and evolving the product in perpetuity or until the product no longer has market fit. And this makes sense. Why would you structure a team where your best engineers are pulled at the time where 80% of your product lifecycle lives, right? If the majority of the lifecycle of product lives post-release, that means the most critical evolutions of your software are going to happen, and that's where you want your best and brightest. So I would challenge the traditional operating model and say, if you don't have your best and brightest during that post-release, well, then you're shortchanging the life of your product. So let's move on to the next approach in terms of enhancing the developer experience. One of the studies that Google funds, and you'll hear about more later, is DORA. Now, every year, research teams here at Google gather academically rigorous data and compile its findings into a yearly report. Many here likely read this report, and it's called the State of DevOps Report. Perhaps the most important result that we found through this research is that your software delivery capability can provide a competitive advantage to your business. In fact, our research highlights that elite performers, ones who ship code multiple times a day, are 2.5 times more likely to achieve or exceed their goals. These findings have been held, revalidated each year by that research program. The fourth approach that I'd like to talk about here a little bit is piggybacking on that developer experience. Imagine a platform team that was built around the needs of your developers. Rather than focused on building a large, encompassing solution, they're focused on serving the needs of your developers and reducing their cognitive load. It could be that you're providing a wiki page with a link to several vetted Terraform scripts. It could also be an inner source golden path to production repository, where platform team members sit as maintainers for the organization. The key here is to really change the way you think about your platform team, where their key metric of success is a net promoter score coming from the engineering teams. And the final approach I briefly want to discuss with you is the use of open source software. Here at Google, we're committed to open source. We believe that openness is the fastest way towards innovation, and open source will continue to pave the path for the cloud in the future. Portability is the key to reducing vendor lock-in, and open source really gives you that ability to deploy and, when necessary, migrate critical workloads across or off cloud platforms. Finally, you can reduce the skills gap by aligning with open source and thus reduce the risk of being locked in looking for folks with highly specialized skill sets. Let's switch gears now to modern architectures. Coming from an engineering background, this is one of my favorite portions of this conversation. And so the first modern architecture that I recommend looking into is this idea of modular systems. And modular systems are one of the best architectural patterns, really, to build a modern application. And the way I like to think about a modular system is by thinking about string cheese. Now, who would have ever thought you came to a tech event to learn about how string cheese and architecture are like peanut butter and jelly? Well, if you apply an evolutionary mindset to your code architecture, it allows you to build your app architecture in a modular fashion. And what it means is that you can pull domain boundaries apart, just like string cheese. Let's say we have an immediate need to scale your workload. Well, great. Let the autoscalers kick in. And while you're temporarily scaled, you can start to identify what's happening and using observability to understand what really makes sense for your product. From there, once you really understand the abstractions and what makes sense, you can then start to break it out into a microservice architecture. And the key is to architect it in such a way that you could pull off a modular piece of the system and create a microservice in hours, not weeks or months. And so if you were to think about this evolution in your product, again, it's important to emphasize that having the product team where you've got your best engineers for that evolution post-release is really part of your competitive advantage. Also, some really smart people back this up that I respect well. And they say if you start with a microservice architecture, chances are it's not going to work out very well for you. And so that is why I highly make the recommendation to look at evolutionary modular thinking in terms of your architecture. Great. Now that we've got an application, where do we host it? So containers are the standard, immutable, and portable unit of modern applications. And what do we mean by this? Well, standardize is an adoption of an agreed standard, which has led to huge community of tools and practices. Immutable, meaning if you need to make changes, well, you've got to rebuild the entire container image again. And finally, portable is an agreed upon packaging format that can be shared, promoted across environments. As we all know, Kubernetes has since become the de facto container orchestrator. Like physical shipping containers, it's completely revolutionized the supply chain. So too have software containers in our industry. Just looking at the stats alone, containers have crossed the chasm and adoption is clearly accelerating. In fact, what I love to tell customers is if you really think about the plans you put together 5 years ago, it's highly likely that you would have never planned for containers and Kubernetes. And that's why it's important to, again, to have those product teams continually improving, continually evolving their products through the life cycle of the application. And so by centralizing on containers as the abstraction of choice, you now create the flexibility for your team to take a better together approach. See, there's no single runtime engine that's the right engine for every organization. In fact, there's not even the right organization for every team. It could be team specific. For example, some of our customers have teams that prefer the speed and ease of Cloud Run, right? The low maintenance and operational overhead is very appealing to them. Other engineering teams prefer the Kubernetes API, but lack the operational expertise to run that Kubernetes cluster. So they prefer GKE Autopilot. And some of our largest customers prefer the knobs and dials and need to be able to fully operate and control their fleets. So they go with GKE Standard. At Google, the idea is to create a portable platform to give you the ability to move your container just by changing a handful of lines of codes. And that's the portability I would urge all organizations to start to strive for. Now, this wouldn't be a Google event without me showing you slides of how our customers rave about us, right? And how effective our platforms are for them. But they love us. Let's talk about databases now. Remember earlier when I talked about continually improving on your user's experience? That's what really sets companies apart. It's their ability to use data and software at the heart of their customers' experience. Companies like the Major League Baseball, one of the oldest major professional sports leagues in the world, partnered with Google to create a unified data platform across 30 of their ballparks to deliver a more personalized, immersive fan experience. So as soon as the ball's hit, they could tell customers if that's the longest ball ever hit, or if it's the longest hit by that player, or how many ballparks would that have been a home run in. This changes how they interact with their customers. The truth is, these stats here are further proof that Google Cloud is the best place to run operational workloads, right? Google Cloud databases are proven to run planet-wide workloads, from the most demanding workloads of our enterprise customers to Google services with more than 1 billion users around the globe. At the end of the day, we've got the right place for you to store your transactional and operational workloads. Not only that, we can give your data scale that's unmatched. Because Google Cloud is committed to open source and open standards, we offer managed services that are fully compatible with the most popular open source engines. You might think, great, this is for born in the cloud companies, but 100-year-old companies are going to open and standards and they will go faster. And this is important because if you think about the portability within our database ecosystem, you can start with Cloud SQL. If you need more performance and scale and reliability, you can move up to our AlloyDB offering. And finally, if you need to achieve planet-wide scale, you can stand up our Spanner offering as well to achieve that. I'm not going to lie and say it's always easy, but our customers rave about our experts. Finally, I'm going to leave you with how I think about security in a modern world. I think of 3 things: trust nothing, detect everything, and know what Google knows. At Google, we approach your platform where we think about security by default and provide blueprints like Security Foundation to give you a proven security posture. Whether it's tools like Cloud Armor to detect DDoS attacks and protect you from them, or Security Command Center so you know what we know, to identity platforms so you can trust no one and protect everything, or even building in sensible defaults on GKE Autopilot and Cloud Run to protect you from misconfigurations. And finally, you'll hear about a bit of our approach on building a secure supply chain, which you'll hear about later in these talks. At the end of the day, here at Google, we're committed to ensuring that you don't end up in the headlines. So with that, if any of these things sound interesting to you, I would encourage you to scan this QR code and sign up. We'd love to have our experts sit down with you and help you build what's next with Google Cloud. And with that, thank you very much, and I'd like to encourage you to sit through our next module and have a good day.
Hi, I'm Keith Daniken. I'm an application modernization specialist with Google Cloud. So today I want to talk to you about how to get the most value out of your API program. Let's start with this. Why are APIs important? Why are they interesting to us? Why should we spend some time thinking about and talking about APIs? Well, an API is something that powers an experience. The other day, I was looking for some parts for my house. I was looking for these door hinges, and I found them out on a website, bought them, installed them, and it was good. But in looking at the website, I thought this is a perfect example of a typical website any of us might encounter. There's all kinds of information all over this page, and it comes from someplace, a variety of different backend systems. And a developer has taken all of this information and they've put it all on this screen to deliver a good experience for us. So all of those things are powered by an API of some sort that gives access to those backend systems. The picture might be coming from a content management system. The reviews are from a third-party system. There might be microservices for the Q&A section there. There's an e-commerce system driving that price. There's some promotions in there. There's a shipping estimate coming from a shipping partner, one or more different shipping partners. And inventory is coming from the inventory system. And all of those things are being delivered through various APIs. And that's what makes this experience possible. So having good APIs in place allows you to deliver a good experience. We all use APIs every day. This morning I checked the weather forecast, I ordered some coffee from Starbucks, I checked the news, I checked an alert for my doorbell and noticed that the neighbor's cat had been on my porch at 4 a.m. Almost every digital activity that we have is powered by APIs, and providing great APIs allows your developers to build great new digital experiences quickly. So let's step back for a moment. I have a brief cooking analogy to set things up for the rest of this talk. So the other night I wanted to make chicken piccata for my family. I was watching a cooking show that featured this dish, and it looked good, and it didn't look too complicated to make. So I checked out the recipe, and, not bad. But there were a few problems. I didn't have any shallots, and I think those are like onions. I didn't have any capers, and I had no idea where to find those in the grocery store, and thought I might spend hours looking for those. So, like a lot of projects, I was forced to make some compromises so I could deliver on time and on budget. We had frozen pizza, and it wasn't bad, but it really wasn't great. So how can I deliver a better experience next time? There's a French culinary phrase, mise en place, and it means putting into place or gathering. And what it refers to is a setup required before cooking. So get all the ingredients, have them in place, have them all organized and ready to go. So no matter what somebody orders, you're ready to make it. And anything they throw at you, you're just ready to go. So everything in place allows you to deliver the best kind of experience. So what's the equivalent of mise en place in modern software? I think it's an effective API program. An effective API program puts everything in place for the application developer, and it makes it easy to create new experiences. APIs provide the illusion of simplicity, and they hide away the complexities of the enterprise, and the developer is free to focus on the user experience. So how do you create an effective API program? In keeping with the food analogy, I have 8 recipes for creating an effective API program. I'm going to share those with you. So the first recipe, develop a strategy for API management. I really like this quote. I found it in the Gartner Magic Quadrant a few years ago. It's impossible to provide the platform for any digital strategy, build ecosystems, and run an effective API program without full lifecycle API management. So what is API management? At a high level, you have a bunch of services that are running in your SaaS systems, your legacy systems, in your cloud. And there's a number of systems that want to consume those, number of applications, websites, devices, mobile apps, call center apps, that sort of thing. And there's a need to manage the consumption of those things and manage that traffic that goes back and forth. That's where API management comes in. It sits between those backend services and those different consumers of those services, those different applications. And it allows an API team to figure out what to publish, and it allows an application developer to have a whole catalog of things that they can use for creating applications. So some typical things you might want to do with this are build a facade over the back end to hide away the complexity, control who has access to things, rate limit the back end to protect it from too many calls, put some quotas on there, apply caching to help performance, reformat requests and response to make them look more modern, manage application developers, host documentation, collect usage analytics, and monetize some of those APIs. So those are a few of the things you might want to do with API management. So recipe number 2, make it easy for developers to create applications. Google's Apigee team has spent years talking to customers about their API strategies, and the customers who are most successful have a few things in common. They see APIs as the starting point. The APIs are created first before the implementation, and they're specifically designed to support applications. The APIs are the interface to the enterprise, and the only way to get to the enterprise information is through managed APIs. There's no backdoors, and the APIs are designed so they're consistent and easy to understand. If you use one, you can easily figure out how to use the others. The APIs form a facade, a layer of abstraction on top of the enterprise services. The back-end systems may change frequently, but the APIs should remain consistent. A good API program will produce the illusion of simplicity, hiding away the complexities of the enterprise. This facilitates innovation and modernization, and you can refactor or replace back-end services without disrupting the applications that depend on them. And additionally, there's a developer portal with good documentation and self-service. So here's 3 metrics you might consider when building something like this. It should take 5 seconds to excite developers. It should take 5 minutes to create a hello world type of application. And it should only take 5 hours to get your first application up and running. That's pretty ambitious, but it's possible. And if you do this, it delivers huge dividends. This is a view of Experience Developer Portal. This is where they provide APIs to all of their consumers. There's a nice URL for calling this. There's documentation on how to call these things. There's schemas in there telling you what the format is, what you can expect to send in, and what you would get in return, what kind of errors you might encounter, and things like that. So a developer can log into this website, and they can get up and running, and they can build a web experience that consumes these APIs very quickly. So recipe number 3, adopt an outside-in mindset. We often use this digital value chain to explain the value of a good API program. And the idea here is, traditionally we're focused on how do we expose this? We'll open up a port in the firewall or something like that, and we'll share this service with outside folks. But what if we turn that around? And instead we're thinking about it in terms of the end user. What do we want the end user's experience to be when they're looking at their computer or their phone? What's that experience going to be like? And what do we need to do to provide the best experience there? There's a repeated pattern with this, and what that looks like is it means having the app developers have everything they need in order to create a good experience quickly. And what you have to do to make that happen is you've got to provide them with good APIs. And that means having an API team and an integration team. We're going to look at all those different backend systems, figure out how to put them together, and figure out what the policies should be for sharing them with outsiders. And then finally, you've got those different backend systems, and they've got to be ready to go. So think about it in terms of user backwards rather than thinking about the inside systems and pushing them outwards. Consider creating a customer journey flow or use case map to show exactly what this user's journey is. Think about how they're going to use it. Maybe there's a diagram that could be helpful with that. So recipe number 4, think of APIs as digital products. So success often depends on an organization's ability to package up its services and its competencies and assets into modular pieces of software that can be repeatedly reused. APIs let you do that, and they let you give application developers easy access to combine digital assets in different ways, even if those systems were never intended to work together. So think about the life cycle of an API, and like you would any other product. It's something you design, something you document, market, and then you analyze the feedback and you tune it and repeat. Apigee has specific features that allow you to turn a set of APIs into products. You can control who has access, how they can use an API. So you can take any URL, which is an API, and you can slice it and dice it and figure out what people can put on the end of there, what they're allowed to do, whether they have read access, write access, how frequently they're allowed to call it, which applications are allowed to use it, and things like that. Having that in place allows you to really manage these things as products. Experian uses this feature to develop an integrated digital ecosystem across 31 countries. They have a vast, expansive business all over the world, all kinds of things beyond the credit reporting that we might know them for. I really like this quote that they have. The Apogee Developer Portal is helping us seize new opportunities. Access has been democratized, and it wouldn't have been possible without APIs. So all their developers have access to these services internally and externally by simply going to this developer portal. So recipe number 5. Create a secure pattern for sharing APIs with outsiders, and don't forget to include your InfoSec team. So what I mean by this is think about what are all the rules and what are all the policies and procedures you have to have in place in order to confidently share something with outsiders. And those outsiders might be people that are outside your firewall, or they might be people that are inside your organization but outside your department, somewhere else in the company. What does it take in order to be comfortable to be able to quickly share something and say, we need to share this? How do we do it? Well, we can do it with this set of rules. So Apogee saw a 170% increase in abusive API traffic last year alone. And by all counts, this abusive traffic is definitely on the rise. The bots and the hackers are getting better. So you need to have a plan in place to address this and think about it formally. Apogee has multiple policies to support everything from throttling and quotas to payload inspection and transformation. And if the built-in policies don't have what you want, you can use policies that let you do custom Java, JavaScript, or Python code, or call out to another web service. So having these policies allows you to build custom APIs that can protect your systems and allow you to share confidently, or let you share confidently whenever you need to. There's a new feature in Apogee. There's advanced API security. It's a new offering. It identifies misconfigured APIs, which is one of the number one things that you got to worry about is something that's simply misconfigured. It will alert you if you've got things misconfigured, give you a score to let you know how you're doing, and give you recommendations to get those scores higher. And it also helps you detect bot traffic so you can detect suspicious traffic or traffic from automated tools. So Google's uniquely positioned to provide the same breadth of protection by leveraging 3 different products to be used for API protection. So there's Cloud Armor, there's reCAPTCHA, and there's Apogee for this. So those 3 together work really well. Cloud Armor will help with DDoS, reCAPTCHA is going to detect bots and fraud, and then Apogee lets you have specific things per API that allow you to control who gets in and who doesn't. Recipe number 6. Use your API management software to help with modernization. So this is something that's on everybody's mind. It's something that we're always talking about is, great, how do we get there? We were starting from scratch. It'd be easy, we have a plan, but we never are. There's all these different things to think about. How do we modernize? So you can use Apogee as a catalyst to jumpstart your API transformation. You can start by wrapping legacy services with Apogee to make them look more modern. So over time, the service can be modernized, and you can do this without disrupting all the different applications that depend on it. So for example, we might have a soap service in here that's ancient, and we want to make it look new, but we don't have access to it, or we don't have the right organization to be able to simply replace it. We need to do that over time because there's things that depend on it. So you can wrap it with Apogee, make it look like it's brand new, and transform the request and the response that's going back and forth so that those developers on the outside, they see something clean and new. So how would you do this? Let's look at a quick example of this. Let's say I've got this legacy system and I want to move it up to the cloud, and I want to make it so that I'm not disrupting anybody. So I can move that by putting something in between. And some of the goals here would be, I want to move it with no downtime. I want to add support for JSON format. It's currently in XML. So depending on what the header is when they make a request, we'll send the right thing back. And do some call quotas so that somebody doesn't call it, and maybe remove internal data that shouldn't be there for some partners. Control access, make it easy to onboard new applications. I can do all that by placing Apogee between these applications and that backend service. So nice way to modernize, and it gives you the luxury of being able to replace something over time without having to rip it out. So in addition to Apogee, application integration is an integration platform as a service product. And that can be used to significantly reduce the time you need to integrate the applications and data on the back end. This is a new product. It's got over 50 connectors, and those are for third-party services like SAP and Salesforce. And application integration is going to do the heavy lifting of managing those connections, and it allows you to receive events from those third-party services. So it does everything you'd expect. It allows you to do complex orchestration, long-running processes, data mapping with different connectors, things like that. Another thing with modernization is we often talk about just taking an inventory. So a lot of folks don't know what they have. So the first step before you decide whether you're going to retire something or rewrite it or move it or wrap it with APIs is to simply take an inventory of everything. What are all the APIs that we're using today? So there's a product called API Hub, and this allows you to do that. It allows you to just simply record everything that has an API and then put some notes in there, put some policy in there, decide how to manage it, and figure out what your strategy is going to be for modernizing these things. Recipe number 7, measure and tune. So if you want to improve something, you need to be able to measure it first. Apigee has a full-featured system for measuring every aspect of your API program. So basic business metrics like who's using which API, what are they doing with it? What type of applications they're calling? Which partners are sending in traffic? How much traffic are we getting? Things for like capacity planning. Is the traffic trending up or down? And what will the future look like? So there's something in there for everybody. There's analytics for just about everything you might want to measure. So what should you measure? Here's a few metrics you might want to consider. Some of these are going to be, think of them as OKRs or KPIs. Think of them as an execution focus, product adoption, business impact. Those are all different categories that we might put these into. The number of APIs you have, the number of developers, unique API consumers, API calls per business objective, direct revenue from APIs. All of these are different things you might want to consider when you're looking at how to measure and tune your API program. But having these metrics in place will allow you to measure your success and make sure you're on track. So recipe number 8, use APIs to engage and innovate with partners, your supply chain, and distribution channels to create a digital ecosystem. So this is estimated to be a $50 trillion opportunity, the ability to do business digitally between businesses. A good example of this is AccuWeather. If you check the weather in an app or on your phone, or if you see it on a display screen somewhere, there's a good chance that the data is coming from AccuWeather. AccuWeather's monetize their API program, and they allow developers to purchase bundles of API calls. So here's a picture of their website. You can go on there and you can choose which bundle's right for you. The prices are all out there, and developers can come in here and self-service buy access to this. And that allows them to then embed weather data in whatever application they like. So a few different customer stories to talk about here. So AccuWeather I talked about, they're selling weather forecasts. They're processing 30 billion API requests per day. They have over 6,500 developers who are signed up, and that happened in only 2 months. 60 users purchased one of the AccuWeather's 3 API packages within 2 months of them being available. So it's a great story about their success with having a developer portal and making this available, and how that greatly expanded their business. We know L'Oreal, the makeup company, they are powering 25 different branded applications. They allow personalization, more data, and real-time customer experiences like trying on a hair color or a lipstick. And there's Jackson. Jackson created 130 APIs in the first year, and they digitized their business operations. They had rapid onboarding of partners and an increase in efficiency. So that's 3 quick examples of how folks are running effective API programs using Apigee. So thank you for your time today, and bon appetit. Good luck with your API programs.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lewis, a developer advocate with Google Cloud, focused on the DOOR research program. And I want to thank you all for joining me today to talk about how we build a culture for continuous improvement. To get started, let's talk a little bit about DevOps. DevOps is about tools, practices, and how people work together to develop and deliver software quickly, reliably, and safely. Culture is fluid, multifaceted, and always in flux, making it something that organizations can change. So when we think about culture, myself, what comes to mind is that all of the members of my team are co-located. And so it can be hard to stay connected and for us to really truly feel like we're a part of a team. And we've been iterating over time to ensure that we're able to easily communicate and collaborate. One of the things that we're doing to achieve this currently is we've got co-working times. So this is scheduled time where we all join a Google Meet. We have our cameras on, and sometimes we're having easy conversation, and sometimes we're all independently working, but we're all there together with the cameras on. What I found this has done for our team is that, first of all, there's a lot more of those water cooler discussions. And probably more importantly for me is that it's been really easy to find opportunities for pair programming because we're already together. So it kind of feels like we're in the office and I'm just kind of tapping one of them on the shoulder. Another way of experiencing the culture of a team is to observe what happens when something breaks. Okay, let's be honest. We've all been doing this long enough to know that no matter how hard we try to prevent it, things will break. So when something breaks, how do people on the team respond? How does the organization respond to failure? So I had that black screen. Let's go through how I might have responded in that moment. I might have said, it's not my fault. I didn't do anything to my laptop. I actually even rebooted before I started my talk. I am sure it's IT's fault. That wasn't great. I didn't feel really good about it, so I'm going to try it again. This keeps happening. I am fed up. I'm pretty sure it's that one person in the IT department that's responsible for this failure. Their boss needs to set them straight. Justice must be served. Well, I definitely didn't feel good about that one, so I'm going to give it one last try. You know, I wonder why this keeps happening when I'm giving a talk. Later today, I'm going to reach out to tech support and see if we can investigate what might be causing this. Now, that feels like a much better response to me. Showing up with curiosity and driving towards systemic improvement is a much healthier way to respond to failure. So why does it matter how we respond? Well, to remain competitive and excel in the market, organizations must accelerate. We need to be delivering goods and services that delight our customers. We need to be engaging with the market so we can detect and understand customer demand. We have to be able to anticipate compliance and regulatory changes that will impact our systems. And it's important for us to be able to respond to potential risks like security threats or changes in the economy. So software is at the heart of this acceleration. Organizations use software and technology to deliver value. Organizations have to learn how to build secure, resilient, rapidly evolving software and technology systems. And DORA is here to help. DORA stands for DevOps Research and Assessment. DORA is an ongoing research program that has been around for almost a decade. In 2015, a company named DORA was founded by Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Gene Kim. And then in 2018, DORA, the company, was acquired by Google Cloud. The DORA team at Google Cloud has continued the research into the capabilities and practices that predict the outcomes we consider central to DevOps. The research, most importantly, has remained platform and tool agnostic. So DORA looks at things that drive good commercial outcomes. Things like profitability, market share, operating efficiency, and, quite important to all of us, customer satisfaction. So if we know that technology drives this value and innovation, and our ability to deliver software reliably, quickly, and safely is at the heart of these experiences, well, we know this, right? Because it's mapped to our own lived experiences. How many of your own experiences with various brands has been enhanced by technology? How much investment are you making in technology today? So we know this is true. Technology is driving value and innovation, but we also have the research to back us up. So the research uses 4 key measures for determining software delivery performance. We're going to look at throughput and stability. So when we're talking about throughput, we're measuring deployment frequency. How often do you release software? And then lead time for changes. How long does it take you to go from the time you commit the code until it's in production? And when we're looking at stability, that change fail rate, what percentage of releases degrade production? And when it does, how quickly can you recover from a problem? So something that may be surprising is that throughput and stability, they're not trade-offs. And in fact, they actually reinforce each other. It may seem intuitive that if we're going to increase our velocity, we've all just accepted that there is going to be a decrease in quality and stability. But the data shows us that as velocity increases, so does reliability. High-performing teams score highly both on throughput and stability metrics. But how can that be? I think the partial explanation is that we need to look at how we're measuring velocity. We're doing that in terms of the interval from when you commit the code until it's in production. So one of the key ways we can achieve both of these is by something we've learned from lean manufacturing, small batches. Think about this. We've got little increments of code continuously moving through the pipeline. Those little increments of code mean that the smaller the change delta, it's the easier it is going to be for us to review and understand its implications. And the easier it is to roll back when there is a problem. So there's really this underlying mechanism, because we're using small batches, that drives both our ability to have velocity while remaining stable. The research shows that software delivery and operations performance predict these better commercial outcomes we're looking for. And so with these metrics, we can answer the question, how are we doing? But I think more importantly and more interesting is to ask ourselves the question, how do we improve? Dora's research includes a predictive analysis of which capabilities drive the outcomes teams want. Benchmarking our current performance is the first step towards improving. The research shows us which capabilities are predictive of which outcomes. So with this predictive analysis, it's going to give us the insights we need to know where we should be investing. So the research investigates technical capabilities, of course, but we go beyond technical capabilities. We're looking at process and cultural capabilities as well. Technical capabilities are necessary, but they are not sufficient to help us improve. And in fact, we know that culture is one of the strongest predictors of performance. So what is culture? There's a lot of different ways to describe culture. Here's a definition from sociologist Dr. Ron Western. He's a sociologist who studied safety outcomes in healthcare, aviation, nuclear power, and other safety-critical industries. He says, culture is defined as the organization's pattern of response to the problems and opportunities it encounters. So, response to problems. If we think back to my responses earlier when I had that black screen, we saw I had a few different approaches, and I believe that probably you've experienced those all at different times across your career. Well, Dr. Rustum also gave us this opportunity and a way for us to assess and measure our organizational culture. So, time for a little math. I would like each of you to look at these statements and give an honest assessment of how things are going on your team right now. Where do you fall between strongly disagree and strongly agree for each of these questions? Then you're going to average up those numbers to get your overall score. Once you've done that, I encourage you to think about a couple things. First, which statement did you rate the highest? And why was that? And then at the same time, which statement did you rate the lowest? And think about why that was. And then kind of an interesting thing to do is What if right now your team was under stress? Maybe there's an outage. Would your answers to these questions be different in that situation? What we see here is that Dr. Westrom developed this topology to show the link between culture and safety outcomes. On one side, you see that messengers, those are the people that bring bad news. On the other end of the spectrum, risks are shared. It implies that we succeed and fail as a team. It's also important when we're looking at this chart to note that failure and novelty are really two sides of the same coin. So novelty means trying things we haven't done before. But that also means we have a higher likelihood of failure. In a culture where failure is punished, nobody is going to try new things. That kills process improvement as well as innovation in general. So now we're thinking about our culture of our team. Now, I want you to think about your organization and others that you've seen. How do they respond to an anomaly? Do they just sweep that under the rug and we never talk about it again? Or do they really go to that opposite extreme where they really try to stop, learn, and investigate that anomaly? When we think about that and we're thinking about the culture of our team and how we can change it and what influences it, we can't forget that leaders have a significant role to play in setting up the culture of our organization too. The way they show up, the things they reward, and how they behave drive culture. We see we've got these three types of organizations through the Westrom topology. Leaders in those power-oriented organizations are overly focused on making sure that they can climb the ladder to success. In the rule-oriented organization, the leader is focused on doing things by the book and ensuring their department grows in strength and standing. But we see in the performance-oriented organization that the leader is focused on the mission, and they're going to align their organization to achieve the mission. Our research shows that generative cultures have the best performance. It's key to achieving so many of those great outcomes your organization is working towards. And the research uses a predictive model to find those links between the capabilities and outcomes. Here's what our research shows. Except for I'm having a hard time reading this, so I'm sure you are too. So let's zoom in on generative culture. We see that generative culture is shown to decrease burnout and drive organizational performance, while also contributing to a number of other capabilities like security practices. In fact, in 2022, we found that the number one indicator of better security practices was culture. Together, both of these contribute to better organizational performance and lower levels of burnout, while also driving software delivery performance and team satisfaction. And they help us reduce our proneness for errors. So, as we can see, there's lots of capabilities that drive these outcomes, and your team will need these to get to the outcomes you're after. But if I really just want to boil this down for you, I want you to see that happy, productive teams are a great predictor of better software delivery and operational performance. And that leads to happy users. So, as I said in the beginning, culture is fluid, it's multifaceted, and it's always in flux. And it's great because it makes it something that, as an organization, we can change. But how do we change it? Well, John Shook, another researcher, shows that an effective way to change culture is to change the way people work. So he says the way to change culture is not to first change how people think, but instead to start by changing how people behave, what they do. So let's look at some examples on how we might change the way people work to change our culture. I want to start by looking and using cloud as an example of how we can change the way people work that will change our culture. But this isn't simply deploying to the cloud. That's just not enough. How your team leverages the cloud matters. As an example, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, wrote a publication that defines the 5 characteristics of cloud computing. Many teams move to the cloud, but they fail to take advantage of these characteristics that really make cloud a differentiator. So if I'm putting this in terms of culture, I want you to think about culture of experimentation and risk-taking. Before the cloud, teams often had to request their compute resources, right, through a ticketing system and wait for those to be provisioned. This often was lengthy, an error-prone process, and what it did is it's led to developers to over-provision, request for more power than they really need, and because they want that and they want the ability to grow without having to make another request, they probably, once they have that server, they're going to be hesitant to give it back. And so even though they might not need it anymore, they're going to hold on to those resources. Now, if we compare that to the cloud, where resources can be provisioned and decommissioned at the click of a button or with a simple API call, now we are free to experiment and take on more risks. But this only works when your team is actually leveraging the characteristics of cloud computing. Another example of the way we work, how it can impact our culture, is reliability. How does your team approach reliability? So let's imagine that we're building out a new service. How reliable do we want this service to be? Most product owners I know, they expect 110% effort, and they want their applications to be 110% reliable. After all, that's what's best for the customer, right? No, we all live in the real world, and we know, as Ben Trainer says, that 100% is the wrong reliability target for basically everything. But why is 100% wrong? Well, it's wrong because, first of all, it can't be achieved. And our users, they actually don't require it. So it would be better for us to use that time spent on delivering value to them through features instead of trying to go after something that can't be achieved and they don't actually want. Additionally, diversity drives better outcomes. So in 2021, we found that teams with a generative team culture composed of people who felt included, like they belonged on their team, were half as likely to experience burnout. And then in 2022, we identified some of the warning signs to look out for. Specifically, employees from underrepresented groups were more likely to report spending more time on unplanned work and higher levels of burnout. Team leads should be aware of the risk for workload imbalance and ensure that the work is allocated fairly among all of the team members. Oh, how often have you said or heard this sentiment? We'll get it right this time. And how often have you believed it? The truth is, we are unlikely to get anything right from the beginning. Admitting and embracing it is important. Changing culture and behavior and incentives is hard. It takes alignment at all levels. It takes trial and error. It takes time. But I'm here with good news. It doesn't have to happen all at once. In fact, we will probably fail if we try that, because trying to boil the ocean, trying to make change organization-wide, it simply doesn't work. Meaningful improvements come as a result of continuous improvement. Experimentation will involve a mix of victories and failures. But in both scenarios, teams can take meaningful action as a result of the lessons learned. And when you do, you can achieve some really incredible outcomes. And we'd love to join you on that journey, just like we have for many other organizations. And we're here to help you on this journey, whether you're building or maintaining a culture of continuous improvement. A resource we have for you is Dora.dev. I recommend that you start out by reading the annual State of DevOps reports. And you can also read some case studies from other organizations who have found success with using continuous improvement. Then explore the capability catalog. When you're doing that and you're reading about the capabilities, I highly recommend that you go to the section on how to measure. These questions and these measurements are a great way for your team to discuss and kind of benchmark where you are with that capability. And then find out what's holding you back. Use the quick check. You will be able to benchmark your team, identify a potential capability to improve, and maybe more importantly, it is a great resource for you to come back to periodically to see how you're doing. Now, if you're all in and you are ready to go on this journey with us, I really hope that you will join us over at Dora.community. There, you will find some fellow travelers, practitioners, leaders, and researchers on this quest to improve organizational performance and culture through software delivery practices. There's a mailing list for asynchronous communication, and then we hold regular meetings and events that are open to everyone. Dora.community is a great place to learn, discuss, and collaborate, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about creating a culture of continuous improvement. And now, please stay tuned for the next session.
Hello and welcome everyone to this session on platforms that power modern applications. My name is Brandon Royal and I'm an application platform specialist at Google Cloud. And I have this distinct pleasure of working with customers, big and small, on designing and deploying platforms that will support the next era of applications. That's really the focus of today's conversation. As an IT leader, how should you be thinking about application platforms for both your current and your future applications? And what are some of the methodologies and capabilities that are available in the market to help you build a platform in an evolutionary way, really taking advantage of the investments that you've already made? So that's going to be the focus of today's session. We're looking forward to diving in. Now, we don't have to look that far back to remember this world of various silos where you had server teams and network teams and virtual machine teams, all with a very singular focus of provisioning their own specific capabilities by request. And if you happen to be part of the application team, you'd have to open a support ticket and ultimately navigate through each one of those silos, which could take weeks, if not months, to provision your underlying infrastructure. Now, in the mid-2010s or so, we saw a massive influx of platform as a service products like Cloud Foundry and Heroku. And these platforms, by the way, did an absolutely fantastic job of providing an abstraction across all of that infrastructure, across all of those silos, ultimately creating a very clear and fast path to get capability out to production. And these were highly opinionated, right, from a developer's perspective in particular. And that meant a lot of very low friction for deploying new capabilities and moving those capabilities through the life cycle of an application. But there were very obvious downsides. Lack of flexibility, and especially when it comes to various more diverse workloads across the infrastructure, made these platforms quite inflexible. For those of you that remember underlying platforms infrastructure orchestration, this can be a significant challenge. So as we think about a platform for modern applications in 2023, given those downsides, it's safe to say that a highly opinionated platform as a service product has its limitations. And while platform as a service product is great for very focused use cases, platform as a service really alone is not a complete answer. So a platform for modern applications today really needs to support a wider variety of application shapes and team skills. A platform for modern applications needs to be tailored to the needs of your organization. And in most cases, that really can't be pulled off the shelf. If an organization comes to you saying, hey, I've got the most complete platform as a service product that's going to meet all of your needs, in most cases, they may not be fully understanding your organization or may be telling you some half-truths. So if we step back and think about the composition of a platform, it needs to take advantage of the latest cloud-native open source ecosystem, and it needs to ultimately support a variety of workload shapes. It might look something like this, right? To support a variety of workload shapes, it needs to have a programmable runtime that ultimately can be orchestrated and scaled independently. It needs to support all kinds of different workloads from regular HTTP and gRPC, as well as batch and scheduled jobs. You need to, of course, persist all your data, attached to your runtime. And you use things like triggered events between services and event brokers. Ultimately, in these highly distributed environments, you also need to be able to evaluate the performance and the reliability of your services via telemetry. And of course, you need to manage all the traffic between all these services, both north, south, east, and west. and do all the traffic routing and splitting that comes along with that, with things like a service mesh and a gateway. And I can go on and on about all these different components. We won't go through each one, of course, but hopefully we make it clear, or starting to make it clear, that each one of these components needs to be carefully evaluated to make sure that it fits the needs of your team and your workload. So modern software teams are increasingly shifting left to own the value stream from design all the way to production. And this, by the way, provides massive benefits, as those teams are now able to get rapid feedback directly from their customers, doing things like A/B and canary testing with their actual direct customers in production. But the challenge, of course, is now these teams need to have that rare mix of breadth and depth of skills. And while you may be able to assemble sort of a small team to have all the skills that they need to support their app end to end, the majority of these teams would consider this cognitive overload. And in a recent IDC study, an average software engineer only spends about 20% of their time writing code. And we can argue, like, what is the right percentage of time that's needed to actually develop software? But I think we can all agree there's great opportunity for us to increase the productivity and efficiency of our teams and reduce the cognitive load by taking on more of these responsibilities in an underlying platform. So our point of view, and increasingly the industry's point of view, is that platforms for modern apps aren't so much about the platform itself, but really about the team responsible for providing paved paths for software engineers, and really about delivering that platform as a product so it can continually evolve as the needs of the users evolve as well. And really, by making that platform about the platform team, you're empowering the specialists to listen to their users. They're able to identify opportunities for the best cloud technologies, helping to reduce friction and toil, and ultimately helping to improve that speed and efficiency. Now, the industry, by the way, has coined this term as platform engineering. So this is an emerging practice that we're seeing in the industry. And for those of you, by the way, that are in platform roles today, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about may seem somewhat familiar to you. And in fact, many customers are adopting many of these practices today. They just didn't know really what to call it quite yet. So we're going to dive pretty deep into platform engineering and how we start to think about this idea of building a platform for modern apps using platform engineering practices. Now, platform teams aren't just for large software engineering teams, by the way. We do get this question quite a lot. While there is certainly a minimum mass of engineers that are needed, it's a smaller number than you might think. And I think this Gartner quote sums this up quite well. 80% of software engineering organizations will establish platform teams as internal providers of reusable services, components, and tools for application delivery. And you'll notice, again, they talk specifically about platform teams and not platforms as service solutions. Really, as a technologist, I'm certainly guilty of this myself. I often like to think about technology first, but this is really a people problem first. How do we organize people around solving a platform-specific problem? It's really about empowering those people to assemble the best cloud resources and components to solve, to do the job for a platform. So simply put, a platform team's role is about maximizing the rate of flow for the application team to deliver software value through releases. And they do this really by deeply understanding the critical user journey along that path to production that we talked about earlier, recognizing and reducing that cognitive load wherever possible. Now, the platform team, of course, is going to be made up of platform operators, as you would expect, but we also typically see platform developers being a part of that core team. And the unique role that is really important as we think about delivering that platform as an internal product is that platform team also having a product manager. Now, an application team, this is pretty simple, right? Their role is to focus on delivering customer value through software releases as fast as possible. And in order to achieve all this, platform engineering teams generally adhere to some very specific principles. Right? Platform engineers really talk about minimum viable platform and how to automate as much of that toil as possible. They also talk about treating platforms as a product, like I mentioned before, and having a product manager as a core part of that team to deliver that product. They also own more of the tool chain, especially in a cloud native context where we might be pushing some of that tool chain to the development and application teams. Platform teams are increasingly taking more ownership of an opinionated tool chain to deliver to production as quickly as possible. And then ultimately, as I mentioned, the platform team really needs to provide that end-to-end paved path to production wherever possible. So hopefully it's clear why this investment in platforms and platform engineering is so important and really matters, right? It helps to reduce the cognitive load for your developers and in your application teams, ultimately reducing the toil and burnout risk for those individuals. It helps to remove friction and accelerate application development speed while also reducing cost. And then helps ultimately to enable them to move faster while operating both safely and securely within well-defined guardrails. So hopefully I've made a strong case for platforms and really building a platforms that serve the needs of your workloads and your teams. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about what an outcome might look like, what a platform might look like for your particular application. Now, if we talk to many of our customers and specifically those that manage engineering teams, one of the more important jobs of an engineering manager, outside of course, hiring and retaining talent, is removing impediments and keeping those teams productive. So that's the most valuable resource. Software engineers often is the most valuable resource that you have. So it's important that we build platforms to keep them productive. So that's why we're going to talk next about platforms that power productivity specifically. Now, I wanted to start this section by talking a little bit about a customer story, which I think outlines this perfectly. Now, many of you are probably very familiar with Lowe's, and you've probably visited their stores or bought something online at Lowe's.com. They had a lot of the similar challenges that I described earlier: friction in the deployment process, often months of provisioning underlying servers in order to support their deployment to production. And really, their platform team set out at a very specific goal. They wanted to reduce the friction along the path to production. And they did so by building a ground-up infrastructure as code platform using automation wherever possible. And really, they did that by listening to their users. And that's really important. And the result is they were able to reduce their cognitive load. They were able to create clean guardrails to create fast releases. And in doing so, they were wildly successful. All of these changes, of course, happened before Black Friday and Cyber Monday, which in the context of Lowe's is a very important event. And they were able to pull this off without issue. And really, because of the success of this platform team, the word started getting out, as these things typically do, and more applications started to come to the platform team to ultimately onboard their application. Now, because of the success of this platform team during this event, more and more application teams said, "Hey, I have an app. I need to deploy it quickly. I've been waiting, months for a server. I want to test it out on your platform." And in doing so, they're able to get more than 1,000 independent workloads deployed onto the platform. So, as we've discussed, platform teams are responsible for really deeply understanding that path to production and building those paid paths for high productivity. And for most organizations, this really starts with the productivity of developer. And what are the common tasks? Well, really, it's about understanding what are the common tasks a developer is responsible for that causes undue friction. And again, there's no one right answer here. Of course, every single organization is going to be different. But in working with many organizations, we typically see some pretty common ones. Automation of the onboarding process, specifically onboarding of new services or new application team members, parallelization of jobs, of the build process itself. Also creating a delightful inner loop development experience. So those developers who are doing quick iteration in inner loop development, ensuring that in a cloud native context where we're developing with containers and Kubernetes, we're able to do things like debugging and log streaming so we can see what's happening in real time during our development process. Now, we also at the same time need to create that safe and fast path to production. So these code changes can be deployed as quickly as possible, just like the Lowe's story I was mentioning a moment ago. And most of these customers that are doing this well are using automated pipelines. They're using policy as code to provide that real-time feedback to users. So they're guided if they are outside of policy, or even blocked if they're outside of policy for any of their changes all the way through the lifecycle of the application. And increasingly, customers are also using things like canary deployments to safely test very small, very incremental changes with actual users on a regular basis. And if they incur issues or they have significant errors, they can roll back those changes very quickly if needed. So at Google, we work really closely with our developers and operators along every stage of the software development lifecycle. And we really want to bring products to serve those users along their experience. So, generally we think about breaking this down into these three broad categories: continuous development, continuous integration, and using GitOps, as well as continuous delivery. Now, maintaining development environments, by the way, includes, having to pull together all the right tools and all the configurations. Often this process can be quite difficult, especially if you have teams where, maybe you have 100 or more developers that are even distributed across regions. Cloud Workstations is going to provide that fully managed, highly customizable development environment in your preferred IDE, all through containerized custom images. And really, this allows for each team to customize their own development environment while also having sort of standard templates that can be used for those teams so we can get up and running as quickly as possible. Ultimately, this is going to make onboarding fast and secure so we can get teams productive in days or minutes, rather than days and weeks. Now, as you increase your development velocity and you increase more automated testing as we do, your build efficiency is going to become a huge bottleneck. Meaning that ultimately you're going to have to build more and more images, and you need your underlying build infrastructure to scale to meet those needs. Now, Google has been building images for quite some time, and we've built quite a bit of infrastructure to support billions of images per week that we use for our internal services, or our customer-facing services, I should say. And we ultimately export that, we provide that capability to our customers in Google Cloud using what we call Cloud Build. And that's our fully managed CI build system, which is designed for highly scalable image building. And really, again, that's going to help you with that development velocity and quick parallelization of your image builds. And I also really love, Dora. How you heard earlier about Dora and how it can help you to improve your DevOps performance. As we work with more and more customers, the first question I get is, well, that sounds great, but how do I ultimately measure my performance? How do I measure my performance on a regular basis? And using capabilities like Cloud Deploy, we can actually not only provide streamlined promotion of your releases across each one of your environments, we also have built-in metrics. So you can learn about how you're performing against those core Dora metrics you heard earlier, enabling your teams to have rich insights into their deployment frequency and success of their deployments. And ultimately, all this is brought together through open interfaces using things like Scaffold and other open source projects to make it easy for your teams to integrate into your IDEs. So the practice, by the way, of GitOps. So I talked about this a moment ago. That practice of GitOps was first coined, by the way, in 2017 by Weaveworks. And it's since become a very standard practice in scaled operations and cloud infrastructure. Rather than pushing all of your configurations and policies through imperative commands, you maintain a single source of truth in a Git repository. So that system ultimately then automatically reconciles its current state from the desired state in the repository, and then ultimately enables teams to have transparency, speed, and safety when they're applying any configurations across all of their clusters. And our answer to that is what we call Anthos Config Management, or ACM, which is our multi-cluster config management solution, which helps you to drive that consistent policy across your clusters, whether they're on-prem, in Google Cloud, or in AWS or Azure. And what's really cool about ACM is it manages that fine-grained cluster policy. So as a platform team, you can essentially create your policy deployed into your repository and create this very safe guardrails for their teams, for your teams that you support as they deploy all the way through to production. And with ACM, you can ultimately have the confidence knowing that you're going to get feedback, where the users of the platform are going to get immediate feedback if they are running into any policy violations along the path to production. So similar to how config and policy management enables speed and safety using declarative policy, a service mesh creates speed and safety through a transparent and intelligent network. And Anthos Service Mesh brings the best of Istio, the industry's leading service mesh, in a fully managed experience within Google Cloud. And that's going to provide things like out-of-the-box telemetry, so you can deeply understand the performance and dependency maps of your services, traffic management, so you can intelligently route between services, including things like canary releases, so you can deploy a service to a very small percentage of traffic to your end users. And then, very importantly, security, so you can ensure mutual TLS security amongst your services, and things like a fully managed certificate authority that you can bring into Service Mesh. And ultimately, Anthos Service Mesh is also going to bring things like codified Google site reliability engineering practices, so you can get sort of out-of-the-box SLOs and SLIs and error budgets, all those best practices that we use internally for SRE, you can also get through your Service Mesh as well. So in the current macroeconomic climate, reducing cost is obviously the top priority for most of our customers. And we've seen that, a recent Flexera survey of over 750 IT leaders responded, that 82% of them responded suggesting that managing cloud spend is their number one priority and their top challenge. So really next we want to talk about platforms that unlock efficiency. So in general, managed runtimes and databases are going to be the most solid building block for platforms that are going to help you reduce the toil around provisioning, administration, maintenance, security, and scalability. From a runtime perspective, most of our customers start with tools like Cloud Run, which is going to give that fully managed, scale to zero managed container runtime capability. So you can scale all the way up and all the way down just by using a container image. Or a lot of customers choose to use things like GKE, which is going to give the best fully managed Kubernetes environment, which can be deployed not only in Google Cloud, but using capabilities like Anthos can also be deployed across other cloud environments as well. And similarly, on the database side, things like Cloud SQL is going to give customers the fastest path to getting a fully managed MySQL and Postgres instance running. Or a lot of other customers choose or require planet scale databases, things like AlloyDB or Spanner. AlloyDB giving a 4x faster performance compared to standard Postgres, all in a fully managed environment. And Spanner, of course, processing more than 2 billion requests per second at peak. So these are truly planet scale distributed databases that you can leverage in your platform in a fully managed environment. So as you'll notice, Google has long been committed to open source, creating some of the most popular open source projects and contributing to many more. We also understand that working with many enterprise customers, the adoption of open source unlocks significant efficiency, right? There's the obvious use cases, things like removing licensing costs by adopting open source. But there also are some less obvious values that you might see in moving to open source. Things like getting the efficiency of the open source ecosystem. So without having to make any changes or without having to really devote any developer time, you get the efficiency upstream in the open source community that you can then consume. But one of the objections that we hear from a lot of customers too is, well, if I'm consuming open source, I need to now manage it. But that commitment, our commitment to Google Cloud open source really provides sort of the best experience of open source all within a fully managed environment. So you don't have to do things like patching and maintenance of those upstream changes. So we've also been working really hard to make it easier to bring Cloud FinOps practices into the core of the underlying platform. Now, Cloud FinOps, by the way, for those of you not familiar with it, is an operational framework and also a cultural shift that brings technology, finance, and businesses together to drive financial accountability. Now, as a platform team in the current macroeconomic environment, we really should be thinking from day one about how do we bring more financial accountability and efficiency into our platform. And the good news is we've made this easier out of the box by providing visibility and AI-driven recommendations to optimization that you can deliver within your core platform. And this visibility helps you to drive that accountability for things like showback and chargeback models, but it also gives us the ability to shift some of the cost responsibilities left, so development teams can make more informed decisions about how to deploy their services as efficiently as possible on your platform. All right, so if you've been following any news about security recently, you know that software supply chain attacks are significantly on the rise, whether it be ransomware attacks or data breaches. And in a recent survey, we saw things like 730% increase since 2020. So when we build a platform, we need to ensure that we're building a platform with security baked in. So the next section is all about platforms that power security. Now, as we learn from large-scale security breaches, things like SolarWinds and CodeCov, the software supply chain is a very common attack vector, which can expose you and your customers to data breaches, ransomware, and many other significantly detrimental results. And bad code can be injected in your repository. Again, we don't have to go through this entire diagram. It's meant to be sort of eye-opening in all the different points of vulnerability. But we can imagine everything from injecting code into your source code repository, the compromise of your actual build system itself, managing of the underlying dependencies in your tool chain, all those sort of dependency trees in your actual application itself. These are things that we need to think about managing in our platform. And as platform teams take more ownership of the underlying tool chain that supports this software development lifecycle, software supply chain security needs to be of utmost importance. So organizations now are increasingly building these remediations into their pipeline, into their platform, so we can remediate these more quickly. And really understanding this is a hard problem to solve, Google Cloud provides a fully managed end-to-end software supply chain security solution. And again, we're not going to go through every single aspect of our solution here, but ultimately the key is along each one of these core steps in the life cycle, we're providing an opinionated, fully managed option. Everything from shifting left in the IDE, actually providing that insight in the IDE on particular vulnerabilities. So we as a developer, you can see there's a potential vulnerability of a package that I'm deploying, and I can remediate that directly within my IDE. Or on the supply chain, doing things, or on the supply side, I should say, providing things like assured open source. So we can now actually trust the underlying dependencies by consuming a Google curated open source package into our dependency, so we can know it's safe and secure and uses the same rigor that Google uses internally for all of our open source dependencies. Or on the CI/CD side, things like build provenance. So we can actually have high levels of confidence in our build chain dependencies, proving that an application or component that's deployed in production, we can actually trace it all the way back to the developer who made the commitment on the code in the first place. And then on the runtime side, things like ensuring our runtime is smart about what it's admitting into the runtime environment with things like admission control. So admission control is ultimately going to help you to ensure that only cryptographically signed and securely built images are going to be allowed to be deployed into production. And that, again, is just a small picture of how we start to think about this complex problem of solving supply chain security. So we believe that the most impactful platforms that are going to power productivity, efficiency, and security, and really Google Cloud is the best place to build a platform to solve all these needs. So you might be thinking, okay, this sounds great. I really want to get started. How do I get started building this platform? How do I get started building those paid platform application teams? Well, the first is really by starting to understand your users. And this might sound incredibly obvious, but there are specific tactics you can use to map out things like critical user journeys, identify pain points in a friction log, understand the sentiment of your users along the software supply chain. And you might be surprised the opportunities you can find to solve some of those problems with a platform-based solution. The second is about treating your platform as a product. I've talked about this multiple times, and it's really important. We want to take specific care and attention to the user needs, just as a platform would. We want to do very specific problem prioritization, so we can build a roadmap that is going to have the highest impact on our end users. Third, we want to start with the right problem. Again, this might sound very obvious, but we have ways of actually measuring things like productivity. So by measuring productivity and impact, you as a platform owner, you'll have the ability to select the right capability to start with that's going to have the maximum impact. And don't be afraid to start small and increment. And then the last is embracing minimum viable platforms. Right? And this is really important. We don't need to build a full platform to support all the needs of our users on day one. We really want to focus on embracing something that is minimally viable and is going to provide incremental and evolutionary value back to our teams. Again, leveraging managed service wherever possible. So we're excited to help you build the next generational platform for your modern applications. On behalf of the rest of the Google team, thank you so much for your time today. We hope this is valuable as you learned about how to transform applications and build the applications of the future. We're generally here to help you, and we're looking forward to any opportunity to work with you in the future. Thank you so much.